Veasey is here, so we'll recognize Mr. Veasey for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. First responders, police, fire, EMS selflessly put their lives on the line every day to keep our community safe. And autonomous vehicles must not become another danger to our nation's emergency services. And I know that while AVs are being commercially deployed in limited areas, we've seen them in Arlington, Texas. We've seen them in San Francisco. I think the San Francisco Fire Department has already logged 66 troubling incidents involving AVs since May 2022, including events in which AVs blocked fire engines, entered into active emergency scenes, and ran over fire hoses. NHTSA has launched a federal investigation following over a dozen documented cases in which Teslas operating in autopilot mode have crashed into first responder vehicles. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the International Association of Fire Chiefs and International Association of Firefighters and the National Volunteer Fire Council calling on Congress to ensure AVs safely interact with first responders.
Without objection, so order.
And so my first question is to Dr. Copeman. Why are these incidents involving first responders occurring, and is there something we should come to expect as more AVs are deployed?
There are a couple of reasons, and the first responder situation is very troubling. The first reason is that the engineering safety standards that I mentioned before that are in that framework tell you, hey, don't forget this, did you think of this, did you think of this, so you can solve the problems before you happen in the real world. And those kind of scenarios are already in those standards. So if somebody's following the standards, they're not going to have those problems. But the second issue is once the problems started happening, one of the companies did not stand down operations or put a backup driver in the car until they could get it straightened out. They just scaled up. So unless that changes, as there are more cars on the road, we're going to keep seeing the problems till they fix it. Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, interesting. Dr. Copeman, you've also stated that autonomous vehicle legislation should include rulemakings validating the safety of automated driving systems, the software and sensors actually driving the cars. How would such rulemaking reduce the likelihood of AVs interfering with first responders?
As I mentioned, the engineering standards already have requirements to deal with emergency responder situations. In fact, the Maryland Transportation Authority weighed in on the latest version of the standard and put us in contact with emergency responders to make sure we got those parts right. So there's a lot of good wisdom in the standards. The companies just have to follow them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent for this letter to be entered into the record. It's from the International Union of Police Associations, which represent active duty law enforcement professionals that are, again, concerned about the broad preemption provisions in AV legislation that may invalidate laws requiring AVs to yield to emergency response vehicles and otherwise operate lawfully in case of emergency.
Without objection, so order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Copeman, I also want to ask you, could preempting state and local laws regarding design, construction, and performance of AVs potentially invalidate state and local traffic laws requiring AVs to yield to emergency vehicles?
I think that's a very real risk. And the way I look at it is completely reasonable for the federal government to control the equipment that can drive the vehicle in various ways. But the states and localities need to keep control over the envelopes of the behaviors that are permissible. So for example, there may be in a fire, an emergency response scene, the emergency responders may need the ability to make sure that vehicle is 100% disabled. And they need to put requirements specific to their unique geographic and other population needs. But the federal government, sure, they should be in charge of making sure the equipment obeys whatever the local traffic laws are.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We don't want preemption to take that away from the localities.
I wanted to ask you also, I know that Representative Dingell's bill explicitly saves state and local traffic laws and requires that NHTSA compete a ongoing proceeding to establish safety engineering practices and standards for computer driver safety. How would these requirements help ensure AVs interact safely with first responders?
Well, the conformance to the standards requires the companies to consider various emergency responder scenarios with some level of specificity and make sure that they've considered in the safety case. The safety case is a well-reasoned discussion based on evidence why they think they're safe, and the safety case has to consider emergency response scenes. And so if the ANPRM is carried forward, it will invoke standards that require considering that during the design of these vehicles.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you for allowing me to wave on.